Council Taxation meeting will come to order. Are there any requests for bill introductions today? Seeing none, we will move on to our informational briefing for today, and we'd like to welcome to the podium Mr. Edward Penner with KLRD. Will be providing us kind of an overview on the some of the property tax programs that we have in existence, their utilization, and some of the circuit breakers that we currently have in place under the Safe Senior and Homestead Property Tax Act. But I will turn it over to Mr. Penner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This is a largely based upon a presentation that I gave to the Special Committee on Taxation that met during this most recent interim. Property tax relief is something that is, of course, always of interest to the legislature, it seems like, and this is one means of achieving that relief. This would be, this is going to be oriented around specifically targeted towards residential property tax relief and more specifically residential property tax relief to certain categories of taxpayers, primarily low income, and then also having some other qualifications. I've put here the title, Circuit Breakers, Tax Freezes, and Golden Years, just because that's the exact same title that I used for the interim tax committee, and that's what the chair asked me to present on today. Let's see if I can work out there. So what I'm going to go over are kind of five topics, 4 questions, and then one just information. Kind of what are circuit breakers? What are tax freezes? What does Kansas currently have? What do other states have? And then just a brief description of the Golden Years Homestead Property Tax Freeze Act proposals that have been considered in the Senate in recent sessions, somewhat considered by this body, although certainly not had as close of a look to them as the Senate has. And by all means, stop me at any time with questions, or if you just want to wait till the end and save your questions, I can do whatever you like.
Yes, committee, I would encourage you as we go throughout the presentation, if you have a question, go ahead and get my attention, and we'll address questions going through rather than waiting till the end.
Okay. So the first question that I'm going to try to look at is, what is a circuit breaker? And a circuit breaker in property tax parlance is a property tax relief where the benefit for the taxpayer is dependent upon and determined by the taxpayer's income and sometimes other criteria and the property tax burden of the taxpayer. And so it's kind of a joining of, we typically think of property tax as entirely separate from income, and income tax being income driving income tax and property value driving property tax. This is kind of a place where the income and the property value kind of join together a little bit. It's analogous, of course, to the device that presumably many people have in their homes that breaks an electrical circuit during an overload. And the concept is that if the taxpayer's property tax burden becomes overloaded, so to speak, relative to that taxpayer's income, then the circuit breaker kicks in to provide property tax relief to that taxpayer. It doesn't just automatically happen for any of these people. It's kind of based upon that ratio conceptually. There's an implicit kind of admission in enacting a circuit breaker policy that at least for some taxpayers, the property tax burden is too high. Nobody wants to say that the tax burden necessarily is or isn't too high in certain settings. Of course, maybe some people do want to say that it is too high, but there's an almost implicit admission in enacting this sort of policy that at least for some taxpayers, the property tax burden is too high. And so what are the things that go into a circuit breaker? The first item that has to go in is the eligibility determination for the taxpayer. And so you have to decide, is this person going to receive the benefit afforded by this policy? Usually, the issues that go into that eligibility determination, oftentimes there's an age question. Is the person either a senior citizen? Do they have a dependent minor child? Those are the sorts of things that go into age. There's, I believe, essentially always an income tax, an income element to the eligibility determination, because of course that's one part of the ratio there. That's what the property tax burden in relative to the person's income. And then of course there are other criteria that can also be means to qualify. Most frequently these are things like disability status, or perhaps veteran status, or veterans disability status, or something like that. The second thing that it comes into question when it comes to a circuit breaker is the benefit calculation. And so the things that go into the actual benefit calculation are the amount of the taxpayer's income and the amount of the taxpayer's property tax, of course. And then also usually these programs do have some sort of statutory hard and fast either maximum or minimum benefits built in. It would seem a little silly if we decided that a circuit breaker was necessary, but by the time you work your way through the formula of the circuit breaker and the income to property tax ratio, it kicked out a 32-cent benefit or something like that. That might seem like maybe that's not really worth it. So oftentimes there are minimum benefits built in, but also sometimes there are maximum benefits built in. And then of course the other issue that always comes into play as it relates to circuit breakers is the actual administration and the disbursement of the benefit. In Kansas, ours are administered by the Department of Revenue, of course, but they're dispersed largely through the income tax filing. The key distinction here that different states do it different ways is this going to be administered directly on your property tax bill, or is this going to be dispersed to you through some sort of refund check or on your income tax filing? And then also the administration of it, is this going to be something that is locally administered as it is in some states, or is this going to be administered at the state level and uniformly there? The other thing that I would note as it relates to that question, and this is something that I'll mention a couple more times as we work our way through this presentation, is that Kansas does have constitutional provisions related to property tax that require a certain approach. Kansas in Article 11, Section 1 of its Constitution provides for the property tax across the state, and it specifies that it should be assessed uniformly. And so in order to in essence get around that, because a property tax circuit breaker necessarily is disuniform in the assessment of property tax, it kind of has to be done kind of off of the property tax bill itself. And so that's something that is just something to keep in mind.
Representative Sanders with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I pay my property taxes twice a year. How do I know whether or not I'm eligible? Of course, obviously I grumble about how much it is, but I pay it, and I can pay it. But how would I know if I might qualify for a circuit breaker?
So the actual qualification in Kansas, I'll touch on later on, but in terms of how you would know, it really is kind of, there's no aspect of that on your property tax bill itself, of course. And so certainly there are organizations, nonprofit organizations, local governments many times may kind of market these programs, especially if taxpayers indicate that they're having trouble paying their property taxes. But there's no automatic informing you of your eligibility for this when you're filing your property tax. There's a kind of a necessary form that you have to fill out when you're filing your income tax in order to be a beneficiary of this program in Kansas.
So I have to proactively seek this information out?
Yeah, there's a certain proactivity to it required.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You had said that the disbursement method is through the state income tax. Does the tax refund mechanism, if that's what it is, actually get back to the entities and the taxing entities that make up the entirety of the property tax?
So no, since these are state level programs in Kansas, and so the entirety of the kind of hit of these programs in terms of to the revenue is paid for by the state. And so the local governments that are levying the property taxes that are being offset by these programs, they don't really feel the burden of the fiscal effect of these policies in Kansas.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, please continue, Eddie.
Sure. And so that was just kind of conceptual information about circuit breakers and what they are. Next, I'll kind of talk about conceptual information about tax freezes and what they are. And a tax freeze, maybe I don't need to talk too much about this because it's exactly what it sounds like. A tax freeze is form of property tax relief that freezes the property tax burden of a taxpayer to a fixed year, and then generally either limits or prohibits tax increase from that year. And so a tax freeze might literally say that once you become a qualifying taxpayer, maybe because of your age or your income, whatever your property tax bill was that year, it's that forever as long as you continue to qualify for the program. Or the other way that sometimes tax freezes work is they're kind of what might be described as a softer freeze, where it allows for a certain rate of growth of that property tax burden, but not the full rate of growth. So it might be capped at, say, a 1% type increase on a year-over-year basis from whenever the taxpayer first became eligible for that benefit. And so if the qualifying criteria are age 65 and income under $40,000 for a tax freeze program. Once a taxpayer hits that age 65, whatever their property taxes are that year, let's say hypothetically they're $1,500 on their residence that year, I just made that number up. They could be higher or lower depending upon a number of factors. The next year, if their property taxes would have gone up 5%, 5% of $1,500, I think, is $75. Their tax bill, instead of being $1,575, would continue to be $1,500, and so the benefit would be $75 that first year. But then the second year, presumably their property taxes might go up another, let's say, 3% that year. Forgive me, I'm not going to try to do 3% on $1,575 here at the podium, but whatever that amount would be that year, it wouldn't go up by that amount. And so the benefit would kind of continue to expand as the property taxpayer continued further into their eligibility within the program.
We have a question from Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. Wouldn't it be a lot more easier and more fair for this if this was just implemented like on a freeze whenever you buy your property? Whatever age you are, your property tax is just frozen unless you move up or develop. Wouldn't that be a lot simpler and fairer way to treat Kansans and trying to play this, whatever this is?
So I'm going to not opine just because our office doesn't have opinions on what is fair. That's kind of in your hands as policymakers. But in terms of the simplicity of administration, I do imagine that would probably be the simplest way to do it. However, the Kansas Constitution does have a provision which requires uniformity in the assessment of property, and it would probably prohibit doing that directly. And that's oftentimes why, absent a constitutional amendment, a program like this would likely have to operate in a more complicated manner. Now, that's not to say that a constitutional amendment couldn't be proposed to provide for that sort of tax policy, but it would probably require that, which, of course, has a different level of complexity versus just a bill.
And I hear what you're saying, but it seems like every constitutional amendment we have is almost anti-growth and kind of forcing this state to be more outward migration. I mean, do you have any suggestions to try to turn this around? And I mean, there's so many counties losing population now.
I don't have any suggestions for you as far as that goes. No.
Representative Sanders with a
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chairman. So when you say a freeze, is that a freeze of the valuation of your property, or a freeze of the mill levy, or a freeze of both?
So the property, that's a great question. The property tax calculation, of course, is your valuation multiplied by the aggregate mill levy of the taxing entities that your property is located within, resulting in a property tax bill. And the way that different states do this, it actually takes two different forms. I don't believe that any states freeze the aggregate mill levy imposed by the taxing entities, but some states freeze the end result tax bill, and so that's what is referred to as a tax freeze. But what I noted here is a different approach that some states take that is referred to usually as an assessment freeze, but does kind of function the same way, where the assessed value of the property is frozen once the taxpayer becomes an eligible taxpayer. And so if the mill levy goes goes up, then the bill could still go up. But if the mill levy went down, then the tax bill, of course, could still go down in that.
So if the mill levy goes up, it's not a freeze of real dollars then?
In the event the policy is an assessment freeze, that is correct. But as I mentioned, different states do this different ways. Some impose tax freezes where truly the tax bill that the taxpayer pays is frozen.
The actual dollars.
In terms of actual dollars. $1,500, if you're eligible, is $1,500 forever. And sometimes it is the assessed valuation of the home. If it's $250,000 the year you're eligible, then it's taxed as if it's $250,000 forever, and whatever the mill levy generates for that value of home is your tax bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, please continue.
Sure, and so that leads into the other thing I was going to mention in the slide, and that is that some states do this a little differently. Some states freeze the tax bill, some states freeze the assessment. Tax freezes, of course, have their own set of items that you have to work out when if you're interested in implementing a tax freeze policy. The first of those is the eligibility determination for the taxpayer. The states that have these generally have the same sorts of eligibility criteria for a tax freeze as they have for a circuit breaker. The age of the taxpayer sometimes, the income level of the taxpayer oftentimes, and then sometimes also there are other criteria, those that I mentioned, disability, a veteran status or a disability veteran type status. So those are the other things that do tend to come into play in tax freezes and assessment freezes. When on my slides that say tax freezes, it kind of is intended to capture both. And so the other item that once again comes into play is kind of what the benefit actually is, and that is it literally frozen at that amount, or is it more of a soft type freeze where it's capped at its percent growth year over year, regardless of what the actual tax bill would be? Is there allowance within this kind of freeze program for the event that a tax bill or assessed valuation would have gone down? Does new construction or substantial renovation of the property result in the property kind of coming out of the program? What if the taxpayer's income changes for 1 year or changes? Does that kind of result in them setting a new base year for the program based upon their kind of otherwise actual property tax bill? Those are the sorts of questions that policymakers have to work through if they are looking at implementing a tax freeze. And of course, similar to the circuit breakers, the administration and disbursement questions have to come into play once again with tax freeze programs. Is this going to be a state level program? Is it going to be a local program? And if so, at the state level, who would it be administering it? And then, of course, as I have to reiterate, as I've already mentioned twice, the Kansas Constitution does have a provision requiring uniformity in the assessment of properties for property tax purposes. And so any implementation of this in Kansas requires one of two things: either a constitutional amendment, or that this program kind of be done off of the property tax bill itself. The way we've done that historically in Kansas for property tax relief programs is, of course, through a refund that the Department of Revenue administers. So that brings me to kind of the current Kansas programs. What does Kansas currently offer? Kansas currently offers kind of two programs, kind of one. It's kind of two programs housed within the same program: the Homestead Property Tax Refund Act and the Selective Assistance for Effective Senior Relief, or SAFE Senior program. The Homestead Property Tax Refund Act is found in Chapter 49, Article 45 of the Kansas statutes. It is kind of the most traditional circuit breaker possible. In order to qualify for it, the taxpayer has to be either 55 or older, or have a tax dependent residing in the residence under the age of 18, and have someone blind or disabled, and their income has to be under $36,300. And that was actually last year's amount. I just checked the Department of Revenue. It looks like this year's is going to be $36,600. There's a formula associated with that income level. It's actually linked to the 2004 amount of $27,600, and then refers to the Federal Internal Revenue Code's cost of living adjustment to bring that forward. And so that $27,600 in 2004 is kind of the federal tax cost of living adjustment up to $36,600 in the current year. The benefits under this program are also on a sliding scale according to the income, but they are capped at $700. And so I'll kind of walk through the way that sliding scale works. And the value of the benefit to the taxpayer is the amount of property tax paid reduced by, and then based upon their income, it may be $0 for taxpayers with less than $6,000 in income. And then it starts kicking up at a rate of 4% of the tax for every $1,000 of income above $7,000. And so if you have $9,000 of income for the taxpayer, that is 4 plus the 1 to 8, 12% of the tax is reduced from the 100%. So you would get 88% of the tax would be the benefit amount, but then it is capped at $700. And so that kind of works its way up to $16,000, and then instead of 4% for every $1,000, it jumps up to 5% for every $1,000, and that works its way up to $26,000, and then everybody from $26,000 to $36,600 gets 95% of the tax reduced, and so they get 5% of the actual property taxes paid as their benefit. And so that's kind of how that sliding scale works. You kind of work your way up, and the benefit reduces as your income increases.
Eddie, I've got a quick question. You can either answer it now or if it fits in after you cover both of the programs, because I'll probably have the same question kind of on both of them. But do you know when the last time any of these numbers were updated? I realize the income has the built-in formula, but has there ever been any, or when was the last time the $700 was updated? Have these been in place for a number of years?
I was glancing back at Kathleen to see, I don't think that 700 has been updated since probably 06 or 07, which was, I think, when the Safe Senior Program was added, in essence, and the numbers were kind of reset at that time. And it actually might be back to 04 when that number was increased. Yeah, that's an important note, that the cost of living adjustments and the formulaic increases to the income thresholds here do not apply to either the cap for the benefits under the Homestead, or that there is another element that I didn't add a bullet point in here, and that is that the valuation of a home in order to be eligible for this must be equal to or less than $350,000 of assessed value. And so if a taxpayer is in a $375,000 home, no matter what their income level is and their otherwise eligible criteria, they wouldn't qualify for these programs. And that amount also has not increased since it was put on the books.
Okay, we also have a question from Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eddie, this also pertains to veterans, correct?
Veterans would certainly be able to benefit. I don't believe that there's any special qualifying for veterans under the existing Kansas programs. But if you were a 55 or older veteran with income under $36,600, you would qualify. But taxpayers wouldn't enter into the program for reasons of being a veteran. Or if you were a disabled veteran, you would qualify by virtue of being disabled, but not because of your veteran status.
And correct me if I'm wrong, someone, but I thought that disabled veteran has to be 50% disabled or above, correct?
So I think you might be referring to the Golden Years proposals that do include a disabled veterans provision. And in that provision, and I'll touch on that later on, but in that it is a 50% disability, service, active duty, sustained injury disability that provides for.
I'm probably just confused, Eddie. Thank you.
Any further questions?
What's new?
Okay. Go ahead, Eddie.
All right, sure. So the Selective Assistance for Effective Senior Relief, or Safe Senior Program, is the other Kansas program. This is actually housed within KSA 79-32263, but that section refers to the Article 45 provisions and kind of adopts a number of them almost by reference. It provides for more restrictive eligibility criteria, but in many cases a richer benefit to the taxpayer. And so in order to be eligible for this, the taxpayer has to be 65 65 years or older, and so those between 55 and 64 don't qualify. Those who are qualifying under the basis of a dependent or blindness or disability don't qualify. And the income is $20,300. That was the amount last year. That is actually statutorily 120% of the federal poverty level for a household of two. I glanced at the most recent numbers of those before coming up, and I think that's going to jump to $20,900 in the next tax year. The benefit under the Safe Senior program is 75% of the prior year's property taxes paid, but it is not capped at $700. And so the benefit is potentially higher for the taxpayer because of that absence of the $700 cap. And this is also an important time to note that in Kansas, pursuant to the statute, taxpayers are limited to one of these two programs. They may either receive a Homestead refund or a Safe Senior refund, but they can't receive both of those. And so with that, just some numbers as it relates to these. In fiscal year 2021, a little over 60,000 filers received homesteads other than the Safe Seniors for about $14.7 million. $236 is the average benefit there. The Safe Senior program, as you can see here, had many fewer filers, just under 6,000 filers, about $7.5 million refunded, so an average refund of $1,257. So you can see quite a bit more restricted eligibility for the Safe Senior program, but a substantially higher benefit amount there.
And I believe you might have addressed this, if I remember right. I think 2007 was one of the dates. The age of these programs, the Safe Senior, did I hear that correctly? It started in about 2007?
Yeah, I think the Safe Senior program was added about 15 years ago. The Homestead program was added in the late 70s. Kansas, I think, was about the fifth or sixth state to adopt a homestead style, a circuit breaker style property tax refund. And as you'll see on my next slide, currently about 30 states have those. So.
Okay. And do you know the numbers that we've got currently on this slide? Are those pretty stable? Are they increasing, decreasing? Do we have any data on the trends of those programs?
So for about 6 or 7 years now, those have been pretty stable. I actually think they've been declining slightly. The department, there's a table with about 5 or 6 years worth of data in the department's annual report with this, and I think they've been declining slightly, but pretty stable generally. Prior to that time, in 2012 or 2013, there was a policy change that provided that renters were no longer eligible to participate in these programs. Prior to that point in time, renters were eligible to participate, and a certain percentage of gross rent was deemed to be property taxes for purposes of the programs. And so obviously that change resulted in a reduction in the total amount of the fiscal impact to the state. But since then, since that was fully implemented, it's been a pretty stable.
Okay. You said, did I hear that correctly, 2012?
It was either 2012 or 13.
Okay.
It was part of both of those years featured very large tax reform bills, and some of the provisions bleed together now.
Gotcha. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this, like, especially in the SAFER program, that number seems kind of low. Do we have any idea how many people might qualify for this if they knew about it? Do we have any sense of how many people would be eligible for either one of these programs?
I'll visit with the Department of Revenue on that question. I don't think that we would anticipate it being markedly different. I think we think that the utilization of these programs is pretty good, especially as electronic filing of income taxes has become more pervasive. To be honest, the computer programs in many instances might do a lot of the work for you. Additionally, the area agencies on aging and in some instances the local governments themselves are also pretty effective at marketing these to taxpayers. I I hope Kathleen's not shaking her head vigorously no behind me, but I don't think that we think that these are widely underutilized, and I do think we probably could see that to a certain extent within the income tax filing data, just based upon the age of the taxpayer and their income level. We would have to make some assumptions as it relates to home ownership, but I think we probably have a pretty good grasp of that.
But again, the taxpayer has to proactively seek this out. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and Representative, a lot of times I know the CPAs that are working with folks and tax preparers are well-versed in these programs. And if they know somebody will qualify, or it looks like they might, they will help that taxpayer look into the program. Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When it comes to income, is that just your adjusted gross income on your tax return?
That's a good question. The statute does have a very specific definition of income, and it is generally Kansas adjusted gross income, but it does have a few tweaks to it in terms of exactly what is included or excluded, and I did not bring with me the exact language of what those tweaks are, but there are some
And I was just thinking, because if you have like a Roth IRA distribution, that's not going to count as taxable income, so I don't think you'd claim that right on your tax form. So if you're getting X amount of Roth, it might look like you have artificially low income, but I was just curious what was.
I believe that to be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, we'll move right along.
Okay, so the next slide is kind of what do other states do as it relates to this? And currently 30 states and the District of Columbia have some form of circuit breaker program. 16 states offer some form of either assessment freeze or tax freeze program. 8 of those states are actually both and are offering both. So in grand total, about 80%, I think I did that math correctly, about 80% of the states and districts offer some form or multiple forms of these. And most, I think it's safe to say that most states have kind of like Kansas, where they have a little bit different varieties of it. They might have one program that is kind of generally applicable, and then another additional program that is maybe more narrowly tailored. And then sometimes they have multiple additional programs that are more narrowly tailored. There really is tremendous variance across the states in terms of how robust these programs are, how rich the benefits are, how expansive the eligibility criteria are. And it's also probably useful to mention 2 other things right here. And one is that in many states that have these programs, especially the tax freeze or assessment freeze programs, are kind of local option programs where a specific local government can decide that, yes, we want to have a locally implemented tax freeze program. In Kansas, doing that would be a little bit difficult if it was going to be on the tax bill side of it, and actually under the current constitutional provisions, probably impossible. However, there's certainly nothing in law, I don't think, that would prohibit a local government from kind of providing their own sort of refund type program entirely off of the property tax system itself. And then the other thing that is probably worth mentioning is that while these are the 2 that I focused on here, and these are the 2 that either exist in Kansas or have been considered in recent Kansas legislative sessions, there are also other ways of getting at kind of targeted residential property tax relief, and that is one that Kansas actually does have a slight variety of this, and that's what would probably be generally described as partial exemptions. The Kansas Constitution does have some language that would maybe indicate that partial exemptions are probably or possibly unconstitutional in Kansas, but Kansas does have the $20,000 partial residential exemption for purposes of only the 20 mil uniform statewide school finance levy. That equates to an annual $46 tax break to every homeowner in the state whose home is valued at $20,000 or more, and is pro rata less for those residences valued at less than $20,000. But other states have kind of much more robust programs of that type and nature that they choose to employ for their property tax relief. But of course, because of Kansas's constitutional language, it might be difficult to implement that style program in Kansas. On the tax bill, of course, there would be nothing prohibiting that style of program being implemented as a refund style program in Kansas. And so that brings me to kind of my last topic, and that is the Golden Years program. This has been something that the Senate has debated and passed in some form each of the last 3 sessions, the 2019, 2020, and 2021 sessions. I have provided to you the supplemental note language that the Senate passed for this provision during last year's session. It's on kind of a one-page, it's an excerpt from a supplemental note for a Senate substitute for House Bill 2313. It's pages 6 and 7 of that supplemental note. And then I've also provided you a set of fiscal impact estimates that the Department of Revenue provided to the Interim Tax Committee on this topic. This is a bill that would have, in essence, created a tax freeze style program in Kansas. However, it would have been implemented via a refund similar to our existing circuit breaker programs, but functionally, for the taxpayers' purposes, it would have been much more comparable to a tax freeze program. It would have provided for any taxpayer age 65 or older with a household income of less than $75,000 to have their taxes frozen at kind of their base year in the program. And so the base year for anybody who was already eligible for that would have been deemed 2019 by last year's bill. For other taxpayers, the base year would have been the first year in which they became eligible for the program. And so the way that program would have worked is that whatever their tax bill was that year, that is what in net they had to pay prospectively. However, they would have been required to pay the full amount of tax that their tax bill otherwise would have stated, and this amount would have been refunded to them by the state. The 2 fiscal documents, these were labeled 1 and 2 in the attachments online. The one that is labeled 1 only has 4 rows of tables associated with it, and the one that is labeled 2 has 5 rows associated with it. For help in terms of grasping what the fiscal impact was of this, the amount is shown on the 4th row down on the table on the left of attachment 2. And so that had eligibility criteria. This used a home value of $485,000. I believe the bill was slightly different, but wouldn't have had a markedly different impact on the fiscal impact. And so it would have provided for 126,609 households to qualify for this program. Fiscal year 23, it would have had an impact of 33 million, fiscal 24, 32 million, and fiscal 25, 43 million. That would have continued to increase into the future years to a certain extent because of the fact that a tax freeze program, the benefit increases for taxpayers the farther they get into the benefit. However, at a certain point, taxpayers no longer continue living is maybe the most benign way to describe it. And so there's almost a dying out of this program after a varying number of years, and so that benefit stops expanding, and that taxpayer in essence falls out of the program and is kind of replaced by newer, younger taxpayers aging into the program. And so the fiscal impact levels off at a certain point into the out years. And so with that, I would happily stand for whatever questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Penner. And committee, I just want to get this information. We did not get this bill into our committee. This was the Golden Years Homestead property tax freeze was something that was amended into a Senate bill last year. It never did make it over to us, which is why I had Eddie brief us on this, even though it's not a bill that we've heard, but as he said, it's been proposed in the Senate the last 3 years, and we're wanting to take a look at that program and our existing programs to see if we want to go somewhere with property tax relief and reforming these programs. But any questions for Mr. Penner? You've done too good a job. Oh, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go back to your comment that the Kansas is required to have equitable assessment? Is that what the word was? Because then later it seemed like an answer to another question. There was talk of you could freeze that assessment level, which would seem to be counter to having an equitable process if some were frozen. Thank you.
So the Kansas Constitution has a uniformity requirement as it relates to it, but as it relates to the question concerning freezing, I think when I indicated that you could do that, I was trying to refer to states broadly speaking. In Kansas, in order to freeze the property tax bill or valuation on the bill itself would likely require a constitutional amendment. But it could be done through a refund type program entirely off of the property tax system. Probably without a constitutional amendment, but on the bill itself, it does have that uniformity requirement.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Eddie, I want to go back to, you were talking about, there was a slide that said 30 states, 16 states, some form of circuit breaker or tax freeze programs. Have you looked directly into some of those programs and what might be similar to Kansas? Ultimately, what I'm getting at is the states that are more aggressive with these programs, do we have any data on the number of people retiring and continuing to live in the state? Because ultimately, what I hear is people are leaving the state when they retire because of property taxes. That is one of the fundamental reasons for creating these programs, is creating incentives for people to remain in Kansas. But I don't know if there's any data. Can we learn from what other states have done and predict what the trend or result might be for Kansas?
I have not done that sort of analysis. I'm trying to imagine how it could be done, and there probably is some helpful information that can. I doubt that you can see conclusively from it that yes, a robust circuit breaker or tax freeze guarantees that your state doesn't have net out migration of retirement age population, but you might be able to draw some insights from it. So I'll see what information we can put together for that.
Okay. Personally, I think it might have more to do with our temperature and our weather, but I don't know. It's just me. Any further questions for research? Yes, Representative Bergkamp and then Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know, will this just be for like the structure, the property structure, like for the whole property in general? It's like if you lived on 10 acres, is it just the house or is it everything included?
Yeah, it's the homestead part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if this applies to what, because you're just talking about property taxes today, but for my information, if you have it, we've always talked about a three-legged stool on taxation in Kansas, and we've deviated that from that from time to time. Do you have an indication of approximately those three types of taxes, the sales tax, property tax, and income tax, what percentage they bring into the state?
Yeah, so in terms of the state government itself, it's actually much more of a two-legged stool because there's not much property tax for the state. But by the time you combine in the local governments, of course, the property tax is the largest single source. And yeah, I can provide the exact percentage split out across those taxes.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eddie.
Representative Corbett and then Gartner.
Thank you, Eddie. One of the questions I might have for you, do you realize, or do you know how many people 55 and older, how many people in Kansas might be qualified for this? I've heard up to a third of the states over 55. Do you have any grip on how big this might be?
I will have to get back to you on those percentages for the age split out.
Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eddie, let's take just hypothetical. If we have two individuals, they're on Social Security, and the average Social Security is $1,450 a month. So their household income, if I did the math right, is like, I had it earlier, 32. But just for an example, if you would take that income, monthly would be, what would be that? $2,900 a month times 12. That'd be your annual income. And so using today's program, Homestead, how much are those individuals going to receive back in property tax relief under the existing Homestead program?
So that sounds like they're kind of combined the household annual income would be right around $35,000 in that instance. And a taxpayer with annual income of $35,000 would get 5% of their property taxes back to them.
So it'd be 5% of the $700?
No, it would be 5% of their actual property taxes paid, but capped at $700.
Okay, well, okay, yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to play that out to see what kind of relief they would receive.
Any further questions, committee? Representative Turner.
It's not really thank you, Mr. Chairman, but it's not really a question. I think about your point, and you're right. We do hear that folks are leaving the state, which was some of the interesting points of the presentation is, the points of pain, as the other Representative Representative Sanders said, is the tax bill comes to the House twice a year. That's when you feel the pain and you see the numbers on the page that say, I'm paying this much in property tax. Then folks sit in a room in Topeka and they come up with a credit that's in the middle of a big tax form that probably isn't even done by that person that got the bill. So they don't see they probably never know that this credit happened to offset the pain of those two tax bills that they saw, or that property tax bill. So the perception is still there that property taxes ran me out of the state, when in fact, you follow there was some relief buried in this thing called an income tax return in April. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very similar to the standard deduction. People don't realize if they're not itemizing the standard deduction, that's not money that comes to you in a refund, but it does reduce your tax liability. That's correct. Yeah.
On that topic, and I'll circle back also to Representative Gardner's comment, at an administrative level, the taxpayers do have an option to have their credit that they do via their income tax form paid to their county to pay the property tax, to where the money, they don't have to pay it themselves. The Department of Revenue sends, in essence, the refund check on their behalf to the county to make that payment. And the county receives that and credits it to their property tax bill. And so there is, but it's not mandatory to do it that way. And it's entirely kind of at the taxpayer's discretion. But there is an administrative component that can allow for that. And also circling back to Representative Gardner's question, and this is related to Representative Bergkamp's question earlier, one of the changes to AGI for purposes of calculating the benefit of this is that Social Security retirement income, only 50% of it counts towards the amount. And so under the hypothetical that Representative Gardner gave, now the taxpayers kind of income under that circumstance is closer to $18,000, which if my memory serves me well, is probably they get 55% of their taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I clarify that? So you're saying that if in tax year 21, I paid property taxes, and then I file my return for 2021, and I'm eligible for this credit is given. Now, I can click somehow and make that credit happen, and it would happen on the bill that comes to me in 22, because it can't go back against the bill I paid in 21, correct?
So your 2021 property taxes, the first half is paid in December and the second half in May. And so then I think that it would be where this could be credited to the second half payment. Kathleen is telling me that it is the following year. So it is in essence just an advance payment. And it is just a checkbox on the refund program form.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Still a little questioning that, because then in next year, that person would be paying a lesser amount, so wouldn't be, but anyway. All right, thank you, Mr.
Yes, good information. Representative Abercamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate all the things about, shifting the tax burden from one person to another. A lot of neat ideals, but at the end of the day, it's a burden that's getting placed on, I think, a certain group of people that have the burden on them already. Really, at the end of the day, it's the size and scope of government, right? That's what's driving the increase in property taxes. Have any states out there, there's a little bit of a push on the question, been successful at passing legislation to limit what local governments can actually do in order to limit the growth of government, which causes the increase in taxes that we're trying to figure out a solution for?
So that's a good question, and I'll start with just commenting on, you're exactly right. This is a tax shifting program, both from one type of shift, one type of tax to another type of tax, because it is paid for out of state receipts, which this wouldn't be any property taxes to the state. It's the different taxpayers shifting, and it's also different levels of government shifting. So this is kind of a tax shift program of many kinds. But there are states that have tax and expenditure limitations that apply to various levels of governments in their state. Those most frequently apply to the state level government. The states usually kind of self-impose those, but I do believe there are some states that also have some form of tax and expenditure limitation that at the state level is imposed upon the local governments as well. And in the United States, local governments are subordinate governments to the state government. So that certainly does exist out there. Whether those programs are successful is probably in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the more the tax and expenditure limitations, but actually limiting what functions those governments can get involved in. So let's say a lot of governments, they add in, we'll just put entertainment elements to their services. Any states out there that say, no, it's not the proper function of local government?
I don't want to tell you that doesn't exist, but I will tell you that I'm not familiar with that, but that's kind of, as you mentioned, that's kind of outside the pure tax parlance. That's kind of a broader local government question, and I just don't know off the top of my head.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helgerson.
Eddie, in this presentation previously and during the summer and previous years, you've also said that when you compare Kansas tax burden, and feel free to correct me, but generally our income, our sales, and our property taxes are all within, I'll say, the middle quarter. You know, we're not at the high end, we're not at the low end in comparison with other states on all of our taxes. Is that generally the case?
That's, I believe, certainly true in terms of just like a per capita dollar amount, yes.
Okay. You know, we are talking about how we help primarily elderly or poor people. I got to ask this question. Are those the people we want to help and keep in the state? Well, and I'm asking if you have any research. Those are the ones we should be encouraging more are the young, the producers, the ones that are going to create the jobs and the economic growth. Are there any statistics or any research that show that it is more helpful to put those individuals or give those individuals tax breaks to keep them in Kansas or to encourage them to come to Kansas? It seemed like...
Is that a rhetorical question?
For as long as I've been on this committee, we always talk about how we can help the elderly people or the poor people or another group. And I'm just asking the question, is that the group that we should be helping if we're trying to improve the economy of the state? Should we try to bring in other individuals that'll, or people, or the college graduates that'll stay in this state, that'll make the jobs, that'll support everyone else?
I don't know that anyone has the answer to that, but that's a great point. Representative Corbett.
Maybe just a rebuttal or just a comment to the last segment. I have nothing against old people. But no, just kidding. Anyway, it seems like the states that are growing help everybody. Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and Kansas. Government shouldn't pick winners and losers. They should try to make everybody a winner. And this state could go a long ways to try to figure that out, but that's just my comment, Representative.
At the risk of going a little bit too far here, I'm going to recognize Representative Wassinger and then Helgerson if you wish to respond.
Well, if you're trying to, I agree with Representative Corbett. Excuse me, because if we tax everything on more wealthy senior citizens, and they're moving out of the state in droves to go live where their kids are because it's such bad tax policy. So what you're talking about is a greater issue throughout our tax policy. Representative Corbett's right. We have to be able to help everyone and want to make Kansas a place that everyone wants to stay and has a fair shake with whatever the taxes are that you're charging them. So, I mean, I understand I'm a little offended by the old, you don't want senior citizens, so you want me to, just all of us to move out, I'm kidding. But it's true. We have to make something so that everyone has a fair shake.
Representative Helgerson, and then I'll have a question.
Well, most of you don't know that I've crossed over to that glorious period of 70 years and older. So I'm looking forward to all the tax benefits that Kansas is going to give me. I am posing the other side because I hear it all the time. But if you go to the Economic Development Committee, the Commerce Committee, they will say, how do we bring more people here and we have to give it with tax breaks? Or something for bring these people back. I'm just saying there needs to be some balance.
And in the midst of that conversation, Eddie, I did remember another question I had, not to derail the conversation, but in either the Homestead or the Safe Senior programs that Kansas currently has, or even in the proposed Golden Years tax freeze, is there anything that looks back over the trend of the property? Because one of the concerns I hear most frequently is somebody that's been in their home for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, and because of the increase in valuation, because maybe it's a growing urban area, their valuation has really skyrocketed above what they bought that home for, and the current value has grown so much. They plan to retire in this home perhaps, and the property tax burden has just increased, I won't say exponentially, but at a very large rate. Is any of that built into the formula on determining eligibility?
None of these programs have a look back component. The two that exist now, the Homestead and the Safe Senior, are kind of static programs. They look at today, and the Golden Years, of course, kind of conceptually has a look forward program because of the freeze nature of it, but none of them include a look back.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eddie, what I'm hearing from my communities, and especially suburban areas, and I'll touch on what the chairman was talking about. We have 55 and older seniors. They're classified as seniors. I don't think they should be, but then, as the chairman was pointing out, what I think one of the problems is today, that they purchased this home 25 years ago, 20 years ago for $150,000. Now it's worth $375,000 with the appraisals, the values going up. And under this program, if I remember correctly, $350 appraised value is the max. So you know, it would seem to me if we're going to continue these programs, we ought to take a look at maybe increasing those appraised values and maybe increasing some other items of the particular qualifiers, because we haven't for a number of years and things have changed. So just, I guess, a comment.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, Eddie, thank you for your presentation, and committee, thank you for your robust discussion. Robust discussion. Is there anything else for the good of the committee? I do want to let everyone know that our conferee list for tomorrow is growing. So I won't say pack a supper yet, but we will try to get through those as efficiently as possible, but yet make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak to the committee tomorrow that's on the food sales tax bills. So if there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.